Good morning and welcome to the 2020 Economic Outlook, and thank you all for joining us very early on this snowy morning. We appreciate all of your attendance. This is a record attendance. We had over 300 RSVPs, and it's also a record sponsorship with our 16 sponsors that you see up here on the screens today. So thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our sponsors. Also, we would like to give a special thanks to our platinum sponsors, Consumers Energy and Motor Shop Electric. Much appreciated. Again, welcome to all the local, state, and elected officials from both the City of Battle Creek and Calhoun County. We're pleased to have you here today. Today, you're going to hear from Jim Robey of the Upjohn Institute about local and national trends in economic development. And you'll also hear from Janet Ady from Ady Advantage about what she sees nationally on economic development and what her thoughts are on economic development here in Battle Creek. And then you'll hear about some local initiatives that BCU is working on, have been working on, coming to fruition, and are in the works and in the future. So without further ado, I give you Jim Robey.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm flattered that you all came to hear everybody else, but you're sitting through me this morning. I want to call out the fact that my new boss, Mike Horrigan, is here. And so if I say something funny, please laugh. Thank you. So I'm not here to deliver bad news today. I think the world is good. So you probably know the Upjohn Institute, but we're about to celebrate our 75th birthday. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and might not like this, that I say this, but we're an outside the Beltway think tank. And so we are not influenced by what's going on in Washington or anywhere else. I think the most important thing is in the second line of our mission, we're nonpartisan. And so that's really, really important. And so anything I say that sounds even remotely political is on me, not on the Institute. So we'll talk about the national economy, the Michigan economy, and then what our forecast is for this region. As Shabak and I were talking yesterday, he said, you've got 38 slides and 25 minutes. So I'm a fast-talking used car salesman academic in my prior life, so I will get us through this quickly. As you're probably aware, we are in the longest cycle of economic recovery in modern history, whatever that means. We are at 128 months since the last peak, and so through this cycle, this is the longest. And there is nothing that's been said or seen recently from our contacts at the Federal Reserve Bank, the surveys from RSQE, which I'll mention, and others, that anything is about to change. So we are in fairly good condition, at least through 21 and 22. And I'll talk about some of those things that we are watching that could impact that. And the one that maybe is the most striking is the issue of the coronavirus, but I'll explain more what I'm thinking there in a few minutes. How this is different, the difference between this recovery and the others is in the past, the last kind of recession was about an 8-month recession. This was about an 18-month recession. And so the recovery is much different this time. The one thing I think is important to do is pull apart, and many of my academic economist friends don't agree with this, is to pull apart the issue of the market, what's going on in the Dow with what's going on in the economy. And so if you look across that bottom line, the fundamentals through 2019 and most of 2020, or at least the first 2 months of 2020, have remained relatively the same. The unemployment rate's been the same. It's bounced at 3.5, 3.6, those sorts of things. The labor force participation rate has been relatively stable. The fundamentals are there. GDP growth has been fairly stable. We're sort of returning to trend, but the market's been interestingly exuberant. And so even if you look in sort of the later part of the year, phase one of the China trade deal was announced, USMCA was signed, but we are seeing some impact from the coronavirus. And so the market is not necessarily a good indicator of what's going on in the economy, nor is the economy going on necessarily a good indicator of what's what's going on in markets. The most important thing to think about is much of that is traded by algorithms, and so they do content analysis and those sorts of things, so it's not all of us making decisions in our personal portfolios in 401s, in 403s. It's really algorithmic trading that's driving a lot of that. Oh, sorry, this was the slide that I thought somehow this got reversed, and I apologize for that. If you look at this, again, the contraction in 1991 to 2001 was 8 months, 18 months for this last recession, so that's part of it, but 120 months of expansion versus 128 months. So we're actually in pretty good shape, and really there's nothing in the future that says that that might be different. When we look at GDP growth, and these are quarterly GDP actuals, we really see something of a return to trend, and that's one thing that we've been talking with our colleagues at the Chicago Fed about is, are we seeing something moving to a recession, or are we really seeing something moving back to trend? That 2% trend is the long-term, that's the gray bar there, that's the long-term kind of post-World War II growth through all periods. We're really seeing that we're quite there. This gray section is the Philadelphia Fed Survey of Professional Forecasters. There's some folks that we know that are on that. It's about 40 folks and organizations that regularly respond to it. This is their most recent, and it's just under about 2% growth. So again, sort of a return to trend. And much like we talked about last year, we're really seeing this kind of slowdown in hiring because we're just not sure where we're finding people at. And so when we look at the forecast, it really is something not anemic hiring, but about 200,000 jobs a month. Really great recession recoveries, although we are very far into this, are somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 jobs. But the reality is at a fairly reasonable and stable labor force participation rate at well below the natural rate of unemployment, which is not really ever put out by the Fed, but there is this thing, that the full employment measure, that's the natural rate of unemployment that we regularly look at, is about 4.5%, and so the U.S. is at 3.5%, 3.6%. It really is a very, very tight labor market. If you're an employer, you're certainly feeling that. We look a great deal, and I apologize as usual to all of our Spartan friends. We do use the folks at University of Michigan. We use the research seminar on quantitative economics. I know that just rolls off your tongue as somebody to cite. That was funny, come on. So their GDP forecast, this is their November GDP forecast. They do it on a trimester basis, so this is their most recent one. They had actually downgraded this from their previous summer forecast at about 2% to 1.7% growth this year and 1.7% next year. Again, that's sort of more of a return to trend than anything else. We see employment growth about 1%. Again, we're not sure where people are coming from. Like vehicle sales at 16.8%, although so far this year they have been at 17 million or above. Now, light vehicle sales, includes cars, which are made less and less, trucks, light trucks, and then crossover vehicles, SUVs, and those sorts of things. And then 16.7 million units for next year. So not in any way anywhere near what we saw, and I'll talk more about it, anywhere near what we saw in 2008, 2009, 2010, but really much more of a return to that standard 17 or so million units for domestic consumption. Unemployment rate is forecast to be at 3.5% this year and 3.4% next year. Housing starts 1.26 million units and 1.28 million units the year after. The real issue of this continues to be, one, finding affordable space to put it in. If you look across certainly West Michigan, it's really hard to find big parcels of dirt to go into, and the construction people talk about that, but also finding construction tradespeople. We continue to struggle to get people into apprenticeships and other things in West Michigan's doing a very good job of it, but it's still a very difficult process to get people into it. And CPI inflation, 1.7% and 2.0. Everybody's looking for some sort of an inflation bump, and the reality is we need to get that. The 2% is really important because that is one of the measures that the feds look at, the Federal Reserve Bank looks at when they're trying to decide on raising, lowering rates, and those sorts of things. One thing that we continue to see, and many people continue to say, that this is a consumer-led continued expansion. We continue to see both the Michigan Survey of Consumer Sentiment as well as the Conference Board consumer confidence to be at all-time highs, although the retail sales have flattened out a little bit, and so people are starting to get a little bit nervous, as there is some concern that this could be a consumer-led recession rather than other things. But retail sales have been relatively flat. The holiday season was not quite what they thought. Walmart reported this morning that same-store sales were down a little bit, but we'll see what happens. But consumers at this point continue to be highly confident. We look at Moody's a great deal, and they've just recently, in fact, since this has come out, raised their risk of recession in 6 months to about 14%, but still pretty low. We see this at all-time lows. I've shown you some graphs in the past, and so we didn't want to use the space to do it this time, but they're pretty good at predicting this. They know, and so there's nothing on the horizon that, there are some headwinds, but there isn't necessarily anything on the horizon that's leading to an oncoming recession, and at least within the next 6 months, according to Moody's. Inflation and interest rates in the past have been fairly low. We continue to see inflation and interest rates moving together. The reality is that 2% interest rates and 2% inflation rates essentially give you zero change in interest, and so the real cost of money hasn't changed significantly over time. The dilemma with that is there's an issue with investing then, because if money's not going to be more expensive next week, there's not necessarily an incentive to invest now. If you were going to buy an F-150 last fall, you could get zero interest in 4% or $4,000 back. If you did it at Black Friday, you could get zero interest and $6,000 back. If you want a 2019 F-150 today, you can get zero interest and $5,000 back. Reality is that these things aren't changing. It's helping people buy autos, it's helping people buy cars, it's helping people buy houses, and it's helping business invest, but there isn't that sense of urgency that money's going to get more expensive. So what are we watching for the next recession? Well, we were watching trade wars a great deal. Tariffs and taxes seem to be the same. And again, not a political statement, but this administration does like to use tariffs. And so there were some threats against the French on some things. There's some threats against the Eurozone on some issues of bringing cars in and those sorts of things. But it seems like with USMCA in place and China 1 in place, that some of this has been mitigated. The volatility of the stock market doesn't concern me as much as the fact that I'm a geezer and someday I'd like to retire, and so I'm hoping my 403 stays stable. Low interest rates or maybe changing interest rates. I guess I was a bit surprised since we last talked that the rates have come down a bit. I'm not sure I fully understood that, but it is the way it is. And so the dilemma with low interest rates is that if we do go into recession, that it's very difficult for the Fed to create tools outside of printing more money to induce doing some quantitative easing that they can really then spike the market. Federal debts and deficits continue to be a problem. We're at $1 trillion, and the reality is that someday that will come to all of you or your children or your grandchildren, and somewhere this has to be reconciled. The reality is that in nominal dollars, meaning in non-inflated dollars, we have sort of record or peak kind of revenues coming in even after the tax cuts, but the reality is that our spending gap is such that that we don't seem to be able to control that, and that will be a problem, particularly should rates start to go up. The cost of maintaining that debt will impact us and the ability to produce. Tax cuts, there are certainly, we're going into an interesting political cycle, and if those tax cuts go away, that could have implications, and depending on which side you fall on, they will either be maintained or they'll be ended. Again, politics is an interesting thing. We see, in the state and across the country, issues of bipartisanship and others and working together, but fortunately things like USMCA did get passed, and that's really, really important. And finally, global pandemics. And I'm not certain that anybody in this room needs to be all that concerned about getting the coronavirus, but it is having an impact on trade. And so if you look at what's going on in Wuhan and in Hubei province and other things, you see that they're isolating people. People have not come back to work after the Lunar New Year and others, and this is becoming more and more problematic as supply chains are being disrupted. And since autos, and I think it's Tesla, half of their goods, half of their parts that make Teslas come out of China. And without that ability to move those goods, to make those goods in China because of factories shut down and spatial isolation of communities, then moving those goods over. And if you follow FedEx and UPS, they both put out information on disruption of supply chains because of flights and other things. So it's not necessarily that the pandemic will come here and decimate us, it's the fact that it will change the spatial patterns of moving goods across the world. So what's going on in Michigan? Michigan had a really good year last year. So this is fourth quarter 2018 to fourth quarter 2019 data. Not surprisingly, we saw retail becoming a bit more of an issue as we all continue to shop online, whether it's Walmart or Amazon or Macy's. We see some question in healthcare, some decline, particularly in rural places. So there are many rural counties in Michigan that you cannot have a baby, have same-day surgery and other things. And so much of that's being collapsed. And so we're seeing that. If you've been following the issue in Muskegon, there's a clinic that's shutting down there, for some reasons financial, but potentially other reasons too. What we've seen in the goods producing sector is growth in employment in construction and manufacturing. We see wholesale doing well. We see professional and business services. Those are knowledge economy jobs, so they're things like architecture and those sorts of things. Architecture, engineering, consulting, design, and those sorts of things are doing well in Michigan. Not surprisingly, leisure and hospitality are doing well, and we've seen some growth in government. By the way, the size of the bubble is the size of the employment in the state. And so, we continue to be a place that makes things. And that's why manufacturing is important because, as you know, OEMs buy parts from tier ones buy parts from tier twos buy from tier three. And so we see in West Michigan a lot of those folks, as well as the furniture industry, all very, very important to the economy. So manufacturing is what we do in Michigan, but we're also very big in this knowledge economy stuff. I mentioned vehicles earlier, and so if you look kind of pre-recession, about 16.8 million light vehicles, mostly cars then. Pre-recession was the average annual. There were some spikes in there thanks to a number of incentives. And then we saw this tremendous downturn in 2009, finally recovering by 2014. Since then, again, that 16.9 million units has been the average since from 2013 to 2020. And so we really are in many ways returning to trend. So if you think back to GDP, we're moving to about that 2% GDP, although there is some talk that if Boeing can get the MAX back in place and coronavirus doesn't make a lot of noise and continue to make noise in the supply chain, that this could actually take us to a 2.5% to 3% growth this year. I'm a little speculative on that, particularly because the MAX isn't going to come back online until sometime, probably in September is the latest that we've seen in the news. So we look at this and we see that we're really moving back to this trend. So what's Michigan, University of Michigan saying for the forecast for this year? Employment change of about 0.5% this year and just under 0.5% next year. So we're really not looking at big employment growth, but we're also seeing changes, and I imagine we'll hear from Janet and from Joe today about how some of those changes are impacting the shop floor and those sorts of things. We're really looking at 1/3% growth in manufacturing and 1/4% growth next year. And let me tell you that if I'd been here 4 months ago before this came out, they actually had, and I love this euphemistic term by economists, negative growth. So we were actually expecting contraction in the manufacturing sector on on a job basis, but output continues to go up because necessarily in a global economy, we have to see more and more productivity enhancements. We have to have smarter workers, not workers with better IQs, but workers better trained to better interface with more technology. Labor force participation rate is about a point below the U.S. At about 61, 62%. The U.S. is almost 63%, but the unemployment rate, again, is well below that natural rate of unemployment reported by the Fed's folks in St. Louis. So what's going on in Battle Creek? So today we're just going to talk about Battle Creek as Calhoun County, so let's set the boundaries on this. It's its own standalone MSA, so we do get pretty good data for it. Unemployment rates are between 2.3% and 4.7% in counties in West Michigan. The MSA is at full employment. Battle Creek in November was about 3.2%, and so very, very tight labor market. I know you employers are feeling that. Michigan's rate is about 4%. Excuse me, it's important to remember that that's the entire state, so include some places that are maybe seasonal economies, maybe farther north and those sorts of things. Labor force participation rate in Calhoun County is 58.5%. Michigan's at 61.7%. Some of that may be a function of simply aging of the population. And so we know that there is some interest in retiring in places like Marshall and those sorts of areas within the county. Because we see Kalamazoo at 62 and some of the other ones around, but there is capacity there. And so that's important as Janet and other people look at places to go. They look at these numbers and they say, can we put a plant there? And I'm not trying to take her thunder away, but they look at these numbers to see, can we grow our business? Can we help our client be there? And so that's all, Janet, that's all I'll say about your, sorry about that. So employment levels of the MSA continue to be just above pre-recession levels. And so that's really pretty good. And so as both, the last recession was both cyclical and structural. It's really important to see that we've come back in Calhoun County to those pre-recession levels. And life was pretty good in the pre-recession levels, even though Michigan had gone through what one of my colleagues likes to call a one-state recession. Notably good is your performance in manufacturing. Fairly close to Michigan, above the U.S., very much pre-recession. And so if you look at the output, the GDP and those sorts of things, and you'll see this in our forecast, if you look at the GDP that you're generating, the value added, the value of shipments and other things, you see that you're doing it probably much more with about the same workers. And so that's what's needed to be competitive in a global economy. Service providing industries, very similar, kind of hedging along that area with since the pre-recession. It's important from the standpoint that services are often, outside of those professional services, are often based on population growth. And as we know, West Michigan is not a place with lots of population growth. Overall, a greater portion of the labor force in Battle Creek is employed in the past. So the bars represent total labor force. The small red at the top is the unemployed. The light red is the number of people who are actually working. And so if you look at this, the number of people working, the size of the labor force, and the unemployment is very good and really recovered well since 2007. Housing values continue to rise. This is federal data. And so if you look at this, there is this one section in Calhoun County that continues to be problematic, but Rebecca and others will note that the values, home values in the city of Battle Creek and others are doing well. And we continue to see that. So people are getting price appreciation, and that's helpful to getting people to invest in homes and in markets. New building permits are up. We've seen historically low building permits here. We're starting to see more building going on within the county, and that's really, really important. One, it creates jobs. Two, housing is a major economic development question across the U.S., and we continue to see that as if you can't find housing for people, particularly affordable housing, that's really a major issue, and I know there are a number of folks here in the Battle Creek community that are addressing that, including the city and others. When we look at the housing price index, the good thing is that housing prices have not soared as much as they have across the U.S. We've seen as much as 6 to 7% housing price growth in the U.S., although that's sort of tailed off to about 2 to 3% now. But we're seeing actual housing price appreciation. It was interesting when I came here. I guess I'm a trailing spouse. My wife came about 7 years ago, and I was told that in this West Michigan economy, even though the market was tight, prices weren't going up, but we've seen really since that time period price appreciation, and now having owned 2 homes here, including the one I'm living in now, I'm glad to see that, of course. There is some concerns when people's incomes, when housing costs go above 30%. The good news is Battle Creek is right there with the state of Michigan, with the U.S., and the rest of West Michigan. And so the housing challenged folks, the sustainability of them is much less, or is relatively consistent with what's going on across the state, across the region, and across the U.S. And that's for homeowners. So that's people who have invested in homes. When we look at the percent of renters paying 30% or more of household income, again, Battle Creek does very well, particularly against many of its peer cities, and is right there with the U.S. and with Michigan. And so this is a good thing, but we do worry about people and home security. So how did we do last year? Well, actually, you know, on the current estimate for goods producing, we were right on, so we're really pleased about that. We had forecast a small decline in services, and it was actually bigger. We had forecast a bigger growth in government, and it was smaller, and no political statement there. But we had forecasted more growth, and we really came in at relatively stable economy, which in a time when we're starting to see, and again, had you seen the forecast from RSQE at University of Michigan a few weeks before they came out with their current forecast, you would have seen that they had negative growth in manufacturing. And so in many ways, you have far exceeded expectations for this year. And so hats off to Joe, the team, and everybody else in this room that's making this happen. So what are our views for this year? And then I'll get out of your way and you can hear some other interesting stuff. We're really suggesting that overall growth, just under 0.5% for this year, and probably some small decline next year. Why is that? Because while we saw almost a 1% growth in manufacturing this year, we are expecting to see some contraction in manufacturing for next year. We've done focus groups on this in West Michigan. We've talked to a lot of people, and we really see that firms making investments, and there is this tremendous ability of firms in West Michigan to make investments in their own capital that isn't necessarily buying a $500,000 machine, but it's people engineering their own productivity and those sorts of things. So we're expecting a 1%, which is not a huge number of folks, but still is a number of folks, decline in goods producing, and about 1.5% next year in goods producing. That said, we'll continue to see, and you'll see this in a moment, continued economic growth and output and those sorts of things, but we really are seeing this kind of decline, expecting a decline in employment, and that's in many ways a good thing. Service producing, we saw decline last year. We're expecting some recovery this year, about 1% growth, and then maybe sort of flat growth in 2021. And then government growth last year, we're looking for a little bit of decline in that this year and next year. So when we look at that kind of annual change in employment, we're really looking at the Battle Creek forecast to be very similar to overall to Michigan and a little bit slower than the rest of the U.S. With the goods producing, our forecast for Michigan is very similar to what we're seeing for Battle Creek, and really expecting some decline in manufacturing or goods producing employment that includes construction in the second in this year, sorry about that. And then in service providing areas, we are really looking at about the same growth, about 1% for Battle Creek, for Michigan, and for the U.S. And while we're looking at the national level at kind of flat growth for government, we are seeing a decline in both, we're forecasting a decline in both Michigan and Battle Creek. So the important thing, and I like to pick on the Jobs Ohio people, we do some work with them occasionally at the Upjohn Institute. I like to pick up on them because I think that a lot of economic growth is not going to come from jobs, it's going to come from output and, again, more productive workers. So when we look at the goods producing sector, remember, we're kind of forecasting some downward trends. So overall, we're looking at 3% growth in output in this economy this year, 3.2%, 3% next year. In the goods producing sector, remember, we're forecasting a decline, but we're looking at 2.4% growth in output for goods producing this year and next year. And so that says you're working better with your workers, making you more globally competitive. Service providing, again, very similar. Service providing is we're seeing AI and other things get into that. And so we see a 3.9% growth this year, 3.6% next year. And then in government output, and I'm still never sure, and maybe Mike will explain it to me someday, how we can account for government output in GDP. I'm not sure what they do, and that's not a political statement. So really, when you take these two things and you put them together, you really do see expected growth in the economy. And so what that means is goods are being produced, supply chains are being supported, and other things. And so when we look at annual change in output, Battle Creek, we're forecasting at 3.2%, which is well above the rest of the state and well above the rest of the nation. In the goods producing sector, you guys knock it out of the park, at least in our look at it, and a forecast at 2.4%. Michigan at about 1%. In the U.S. at 1.6%. Service producing, again, output side, about 4%, 2% for Michigan, 2.2% for the United States. And in government, we see that growth there also. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen. These are the folks who put their effort into this that didn't get to be here and have breakfast and say hello to all of you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm gonna probably speed through some of this to get us back on track because I wanna make sure that we give plenty of time to Janet. She's our keynote, and she's come all the way to Wisconsin to talk with us all today. So this year we decided to take a little bit different approach. We're gonna do current activities, we're gonna do future activities, and we're gonna focus on both the Fort Custer Industrial Park, current activities, and future activities, as well as the airport, and then we're gonna come back downtown. So we're gonna go current, then we're going to go future, and then we're going to go into our strategic plan really quick. But some of the things here, so this year, calendar year 2019, we've created 174 jobs. Now, I know there's a lot of counters in the room. I just want to make it very clear. We report on a fiscal year from July 1 to June 30. There's a pamphlet on your table which might not meet up with these numbers. These numbers are specific to calendar year 2019, which we've created 174 jobs and $10 million of investment. So it's a little bit different than what you'll see on your table because of our fiscal year reporting. Also, we will be talking about some current activities with some jobs reported, like the next slide here out at the airport. These jobs are not calculated into the metrics of the 174. Those 174 jobs are new projects that have been announced this year. So currently, we'd like to just take a moment to remind folks of what's going on in the community. Waco Aircraft Corporation is investing $18 million out at the the Battle Creek Executive Airport at the Kellogg Field. They're adding 80,000 square feet and anticipating creation of 30 jobs. And if you haven't been out there recently, you should check it out. It's great to see steel being raised out at the airport. It's one of our greatest assets in this community. Additionally, out at the airport, College of Aviation, they're investing $24 million, adding 60,000 square feet of space and 35 jobs, and that's due to be complete this year as well. What's important about that, it adds classroom space and student capacity as the aviation industry is coming up with shortages here of both pilots and technicians and maintenance technicians. I know we all love to fly around the world in the nation, but we've got to have pilots to help us do that. So it's happening right here in Battle Creek. This past year, Denso announced a nearly $2 million investment in a technical training center out at the Fort Custer Industrial Park. We're very excited to see Denso investing further in our community and training the workforce of the future. Now, before we jump to downtown, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about the Foreign Trade Zone. If any of you are not familiar with the Foreign Trade Zone, Battle Creek Unlimited, via the City of Battle Creek, administers the Foreign Trade Zone for a 14-county region in Southwest Michigan. We made it an effort to elevate our strategy on the Foreign Trade Zone and getting more users into the Foreign Trade Zone. I can say 18 months ago, we only had 1 or 2 users. Fast forward 19 months later, we've got 4 brand new users of the Foreign Trade Zone, including Denso and Stewart Industries right here in this community. Those 5 employers right there represent nearly 6,000 employees in Southwest Michigan. Why is this important? You know, as we showcase our community and our region to the world and we retain our companies that are here, we're showing them value of locating in this region and in Battle Creek. It helps both on the retention and on the attraction. You know, you spend 80% of your time and resources on keeping what you have, and this is really demonstrating. And I'd have to give a shout out to our staff and Adam for taking this and running with this and getting 4 new users. And a shout out to Stewart Industries who bought into this, took a little bit of a risk. As a sub-assembler, there's some different value adds that they can bring to the table that are going to help grow the economy here in Battle Creek. We're going to take a jump to downtown. So there's been a lot of downtown investment this past year, but Snackworks has committed to investing $3.75 million and adding 38 jobs. And what's important, this is a food and beverage company. We have food in our DNA here in Battle Creek, and it's great to see the synergies starting to move on the food front. Downtown grant awarded this past year to Raffinet Southern Cuisine. So we put out an RFP this last year. About this time, it was still underway to attract new restaurants, and we also crafted it in such a way to help existing businesses take advantage of it as well. And Raffinet submitted for a $50,000 grant that they sought a need for, and we stepped up and granted them that. And I've been told that the project is close to wrapping up, so I hope you'll join me in going down there and having some Southern cuisine for lunch. I can tell you I've done it multiple times, and they have fantastic food. I've even been told that Charles may consider doing some breakfast, and I'm sure he makes a mean breakfast. All right, 9 months ago, you all heard us talk about, we received a large grant from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. It's called the Real Estate Improvement Fund. Just 9 months ago, okay, this program has caught on like wildfire. We've committed to nearly $1 million of investment with these 4 companies here listed on the screen. And I can tell you, Battle Creek's a market and transition. So what do I mean by a market and transition? Is if a project costs $1 million cost of construction, We're in a market in transition. It's only going to value at about $800,000 at this point. I'm just using round numbers as an example. And then a bank is only going to lend on a percentage of that $800,000. So if we do not bring soft capital to the table to fill these gaps, projects will not happen in Battle Creek. This is the same thing that happened in Grand Rapids starting 30 years ago, the same thing that happened in Kalamazoo 15, 20 years ago. We're pleased to say that it's designed in such a way to make sure that the dollars stay with the facilities. And right now we're leveraging, with just these 4 announcements, a 7-to-1 ratio of other sources to grant dollars, seeing the improvement of nearly 54,000 square feet and an anticipated 122 jobs. We've got 5 other in the queue that have been approved that aren't announced yet. But once those 5 are announced, you'd see nearly a 10-to-1 ratio and 124,000 square feet and 182 jobs anticipated. And then we're going to go through some of these projects really quick. J. Ender Development Co., the former old Arcadia facility, they've got plans to invest nearly over $3 million. And they're going to take a phased approach. The first phase is gut and put a new roof on it. It's been gutted. They're working through some engineering to get the facility, to put a new roof on it and get the facility dry. And then they'd like to white box some commercial space and start on some residential upstairs. Next project, LKV Ventures. They are investing $600,000, a little over $600,000, improving 15,000 square feet, whiteboxing commercial space. They took advantage of the City of Battle Creek's CDBG housing grant dollars. There will be 2 affordable housing units in that facility as well. Umami Ramen. We're all excited to see this. But Umami Ramen bought 215 West Michigan, the former Taste of Indy, investing $805,000. Anticipate to be open this summer. This will give them more seating options, expanded hours, and the anticipation of additional 18 jobs. Also, the team from JPG Resources and Cafe Rica, they've teamed up not only for JPG Resources to continue to grow their footprint downtown, but they also work to give Cafe Rica a permanent home at 62 East Michigan Avenue, which is very exciting. And I've been told that February 29th is their grand opening, which is late next week. So I hope you'll all join us in frequenting their location. I've seen some pictures and it looks really neat. And they will be really one of the first that you will see the results of the Real Estate Improvement Fund come to fruition. The Milton, AKA the former Heritage Tower. We're not going to talk about Heritage Tower anymore. It's the Milton. The Heritage Tower, $34 million project. It's been under construction for well over 12 months, and we're in the final stages of completion. We've got 85 market rate units, 28 have already been leased out, and I'm sure that number has changed since last week. I've heard it's been very popular, so we've got tenants living in there. We've got 1 commercial tenant in the Kellogg Company, so thank you, Kellogg Company. And we've got 3 to 4 additional tenants considering, on the commercial space, considering moving in. So this is a huge milestone for our community, and just wanted to take this opportunity to remind folks of some of the things we've been working on for quite a while. And I've been told the 28 tenants at this stage in the development, it's still not complete, there's still several months of construction, has met and or exceeded where they thought they would be on leasing at this point in the game. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a jump back. So we just went through a lot of great things talking about the Real Estate Improvement Fund. We're going to jump back to tell you how we got here. So we actually piloted a real estate improvement fund with 2 projects, New Holland Brewing and Restore 269, on a couple of their current facilities. And why did we do that? Again, market in transition. We wanted to prove that this tool was needed to entice and encourage additional development in downtown Battle Creek. So we know about these projects, but we're going to talk about a little bit further here. So New Holland Brewing took advantage of this product. This is nearly a $5 million investment if you take furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And I know we've talked about this in the past, but I'm proud to say that it's finally coming to fruition and it's under construction. So the pilot real estate improvement fund led to New Holland. What did it also lead to? It led to probably one of the hottest new venues in Battle Creek, the Record Box and the Record Box Loft. I mean, if there's not 10 events there a week, I don't know, then I'm miscounting. But this place has caught on like fire. Cody and Caitlin have done a great job, invested nearly $2 million into this project. I know the square footage on this and the New Holland is a little off. It's actually 18,000 square feet, so apologize, that's my mistake. But that led to also, at the Record Box, our homegrown brewery. Handmat Brewing is investing nearly $500,000, 6,000 square feet, 12 jobs anticipated, and I can tell you we are all eagerly anticipating this opening, and I can tell you Chris and Jen are working hard to get open as soon as possible, so we're very excited about that. But that also led to, as you can see, these things have really built upon one another. Ministry Designs locating in downtown Battle Creek, and they decided to open Collab BC, a collaborative working space in downtown Battle Creek, which I know Janet, we took Janet on a tour yesterday, maybe she'll talk a little bit about it, but these are pieces of an ecosystem that have been missing in Battle Creek that they're starting to catch on like wildfire. And I can tell you, I've been in that facility many times. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in this community that now have a place to go, and they're starting to feed off of each other. So that's gonna lead to some great things. So real quick, before I get into future activities, if you are a principal of one of the projects that I just announced, Tyler, Vin, Cody, Caitlin, if you guys could stand up, Chris, Jen, Bakun, Lance, Tristan, Jackson, I know I'm Dan, Mark Harmson, Charles, Joanna. I know some of these folks couldn't make it here today, but what I wanted to point out was, look, we as economic developers and we as partners in this community, we help entice and induce investment. These are folks that are investing in our community, have bought into our game plan, and they're the ones taking the risk. So I think we need to give them a round of applause. Thank you all. But they are the ones creating the community that we all know is possible here and want here. So thank you. All right, we're going to jump into some future activities. So we're going to jump back out to the fort. We'll talk about Project Triplet. We're happy to announce today that back in December, the BC TIFA has agreed to sell nearly 85 acres at Exit 92 on I-94 to Industrial Partners LLC, which is a partnership between Clark Logic and Great Lakes Capital. And what really excites me about this as an economic developer is they have a phased approach of bringing 3 new modern industrial spec buildings to the market here in Battle Creek. Phase 1, which we're hopeful will be under construction this spring, is a 250,000 square foot industrial space to the tune of nearly $10 million. So if you take all 3 of these phases, 750,000 square feet added to the Battle Creek market with nearly $30 million of investment. And I can tell you from the Indiana state line on I-94 to east of Ann Arbor, there will not be, or there is not product like this on the market on I-94, and it's going to happen right here in Battle Creek. Project Deep Dish. You have probably heard in the paper and some other outlets that there's a cannabis park planned in Battle Creek. That is true, but Battle Creek Unlimited nor the BC TIFA is developing this. What we've decided to do, this is an industry here, medical marijuana and cannabis. It is a legal industry. It is here now. But how do we find the right balance for Battle Creek to be responsible to its current tenants that have invested in Battle Creek, but also to take advantage of something that is here? So in a responsible manner, we got to find the right balance. So we decided to basically create an area within the industrial park and try to market it as an exclusive area for this industry to keep everything together. And we've talked to a few developers, and there is some interest. And right now they're starting with cannabis, but I want you to look at this beyond just cannabis. I want you to look at this as indoor agriculture. This is something where the dollars are at cannabis right now, but this is going to evolve into indoor agriculture. The UAS drone park. I know you have heard me talk about this in the past, but I'm going to remind folks on this. This is our feasibility study's done. We have the proper airspace. We have the right infrastructure. We have a massive airport. We have fiber in the ground. We have data. We have all the pieces to leverage the drone industry, which is at the forefront right now. It's just going to take a little bit of time to mature this market in Battle Creek. And so I ask you today, you'll probably hear about this from BCU over the next 5 years. This is going to take some patience. It's going to take some additional resources, both on virtual infrastructure as well as hard infrastructure. So we are going in this direction. It's just going to take some time to mature it. Also out at the industrial park, as many of you know, it's been a practice that the BC TIFA and or BCU has never really marketed its land beyond just itself. So we will be seeking out some firms, international and national presence to not only we're going to continue to market the sites ourselves, but we want to get these parcels, these significant parcels, into networks that get beyond the boundaries of Battle Creek, Michigan and Southwest Michigan. So we're going to pilot that, and we're excited about that. Now we're going to jump back to downtown, some projects that you've heard of, but these are in the works. I guess I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, but the Tiger Room is a recipient of the Real Estate Improvement Fund grant, but we are waiting on a pending EDA grant that Shabaka and the team have been working on for well over a year. Why I say pending is because we're very confident that we're going to receive this grant, and what this is going to lead to is a food accelerator in and near downtown Battle Creek. I can tell you last week, the EDA published a public hearing notice in the newspaper talking about this project with Battle Creek Unlimited, the city of Battle Creek, St. Phil. So the wheels are in motion. Also, just kind of wanted to bring attention, you've heard about this in the past, is Battle Rock. Again, another recipient of the Real Estate Improvement Fund. Battle Creek Unlimited also very early on committed $150,000 to this project. They're working through their final capital stack. So there's been many people working on this project, so stay tuned. Now, I want to talk about all the great things that we've just kind of mentioned downtown. You know, we've got Hand Map getting ready to open. We've got Record Box open, Ministry Designs, Collab BC, New Holland's under construction, Cafe Rica. We've got all these things that it's going to draw a lot of attention to Battle Creek. And Battle Creek Unlimited has owned 119, 121 for about 18 months, and we just recently bought 99 West Michigan about 8 months ago. So why I'm telling you that is we know we're going to have a lot of eyes on Battle Creek. We're going to have a lot of outsiders coming in. We're going to have people that are living here that are going to come downtown for the first time in a long time. We have committed to investing $800,000 between these two buildings to make them aesthetically look better with the facades and put new roofs on them so that investors can really see the full potential of investing in Battle Creek. So we're excited about that. Also, I'd like to talk about some strategic properties that we placed and or purchased and why we've done that. We bought 8587, the former Schrank's building, and tore it down. We tore it down because it was unsafe. We're not a fan of just tearing things down. There was the possibility of a wall collapse, and ironically, during demolition, the wall collapsed unexpectedly as we anticipated it. So luckily nobody got hurt during that process. But we also bought 17 West Michigan, which is a large facility next to the Milton. And why I mention that is because we strategically bought those because we've been working with and we've been driving investment downtown. We've been working with Hollander Development for the last 18 months. Hollander Development has plans with 17 West Michigan and the former Schrank site to bring 80 new affordable and workforce housing units to downtown Battle Creek to the tune of nearly $20 million. Now, I mentioned that, but I also want to caution, this is going before the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. There's a LIHTC round that is very competitive. And they plan to submit in April, and if successful, they will know within 120, 180 days if they were successful. They believe they have a very strong case to develop these in Battle Creek, and we think they do as well. If that were to come to fruition, you could probably see some activity at those sites late fall or early spring. If they are unsuccessful, they would resubmit back in the October round. But I mean, $20 million of additional investment in downtown Battle Creek. If you see Sophia Square, the former Schrank site, that is a proposed 7-story new construction facility. Again, why are we doing this? Affordable housing. I just read an article in the paper about the dairy operation up in St. John's, that they're worried about where are their folks going to live with these new jobs coming to the area. Whenever we go on retention visits and talk to our large employers, that's the thing we hear. We hear several things, but one of them that sticks out is we don't have places for people to live. So we need to have a mix of housing in Battle Creek and in downtown Battle Creek. Future downtown, I am pleased to tell you today that as of last week, Battle Creek Unlimited is now the owner of 200 Capitol Avenue, the former Kmart facility, downtown, or near downtown. We don't have any plans for this immediately, but the plans are to tear the site down and prepare it for future redevelopment. There are a lot of pieces at play here. You've all heard about river naturalization, and so we are just taking the opportunity to get properties while we can, and this was a strategic property. So blight reduction, look for some activity going on there in the very near future. Now I want to draw you all back to our strategic plan. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing all of these things? We want to build a strong community by driving strategic investment, engage the community, and create a lot of good paying jobs. And so, again, we ask, I've already alluded to this a little bit, why are we doing this? We go on retention visits every year. We visit with our companies here domestically, we go visit them internationally, and time again, the industrial side's doing good. We're still positioning ourselves for the industrial side. But education comes up, housing comes up, downtown comes up, placemaking comes up. These are all pieces that are part of the ecosystem of economic development. These are all ingrained in our strategic plan. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. Transformational community projects are also in our strategic plan. So the former Kmart redevelopment site was called out. Check that box. Now, I really wanted to kind of put some numbers to paper. So I hope you all see, feel, and hear that things are a little bit different at Battle Creek Unlimited. We're doing things a little bit differently, and I hope you can all appreciate that. But we wanted to put some numbers to paper of what's been accomplished really in the last 18 months. These are dollars that we've granted to organizations to help entice economic development in Battle Creek. These are not Kellogg grant dollars, these are pure BCU grants. Additionally, BCU has committed and or has spent $1.6 million just in buildings and redevelopment in downtown Battle Creek. Now the next two slides, it's so much that we couldn't get it on one slide. But economic development in Battle Creek over the last 18, 19, 20 months has leveraged lots of outside dollars. These are all grant dollars. But when you add them all up, we have leveraged $17.4 million of outside dollars in Battle Creek for economic development. And if you add the Tiger Room grant in, which we will be successful on, we'll nearly be at $19.4 million. Those are huge numbers. But I'm the one up here presenting today. You hear about BCU in the newspaper. We're at the table to everything, but I can tell you, we would not be able to leverage those kind of dollars without our partners that are here in the room today, here in the community. And I can tell you there is a lot of momentum going on behind the scenes, and there are a lot of participants at the table making these things happen. And, BCU, we're at the table at a lot of stuff, with a lot of things. If we're not making the deal happen, if we're not in the newspaper doing those types of things, I just wanted to bring to your attention that we are at the table of all things related to the economic development ecosystem. I have a staff that's larger than this, but these are all the activities that we are involved in at Battle Creek Unlimited. We are at the table at all of these things, all of these economic development items that are trying to move the needle on our community, and we're doing more with less. And finally, I'd be remiss. We've got a lot of great community partners in this organization, in this community, but if you like what you're seeing, We couldn't do it without our board of directors. Our board of directors gives us the tools, the resources, and the ability to execute on the mission. So I just wanted to give a shout out to our board. These are the 15 board members and a few ex officio board members that are sitting around the table, allowing the team and I to execute, to make some of these things happen. So I think we ought to give them a round of applause as well. That's my presentation, and now I have the pleasure of introducing Janet Ady of Ady Advantage.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Do you know how early it is back in Wisconsin? Just want you to know that. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Joe, for the warm introduction. Thank you all for hanging around. I've got a couple things to share with you. And one of the things I want to say right off the bat is I came in yesterday, got a full tour. I asked Joe and his team to show me around, and basically I asked them questions nonstop for about 24 hours. And I said, all of this information, I'm not going to show you what I'm presenting. So everything here is just my take on what I've seen and my thoughts about where this economic development world is going in general, and then how Battle Creek is doing in that context. At Ady Advantage, we have the advantage, I guess, of having worked with over 500 communities like Battle Creek across the country for the last 18 years. I'm actually a second-generation economic developer and site selector, which means that until I was like in my mid-20s, I didn't realize that everyone else's family vacations did not include trips to industrial parks. So it kind of does grow on you, it gets under your skin. But the way that our business works is we work not only with the communities, but we work with the businesses that are looking to relocate and expand. And so we've got a really good sense of what's important for them in terms of how they make decisions, and then what the communities can do to differentiate themselves and be competitive going forward. And that's kind of the perspective that I'm going to bring with you today. So not just what the site selectors are looking for, because that'd be a fun topic, but also how that fits together with what the communities are looking for and how they fit together. And increasingly, this is kind of my prognostications here, but increasingly, right, it used to be that communities would just be begging for any kind of jobs and anything trying to get out there and sell. And increasingly, we're finding communities being much more selective, right? We don't just want a big number of jobs anymore. We don't just want any old jobs. We want to be a lot more selective. In fact, on the flyer that's in front of your table today, we talked about jobs that are $17 and more. So we're trying to move the bar, right? We don't want 1,000 jobs that are $10 an hour. We'd much rather have those higher value jobs. And so we can start to see how this balance is kind of shifting as talent becomes more of an issue. As far as what we do at Ady Advantage, a number of things, but we start with the implementation and we work ourselves backwards to what do we have to do to be able to assist the implementation. So we start in that blue box. We go back and we do the positioning and the competitive work, and we base it all on research. And one of the reasons that we focus so much on research, I guess there's two reasons. First is if you're never sure what direction to go, ask the customer. And in order to ask the customer, let's get some research and some data about what's important. And the second is that planning without research is just pipe dreaming. Because what happens is that y'all can get together and think about what you want to do and what you want to be and all this kind of stuff, but if it's not grounded in the reality of where you are, it becomes impossible to create that vector of saying, how are we going to get there? Right? Because we're not starting from the same place of understanding. And so we go through a process of where are you at now, where do you want to be, what's the difference, right? What's the gap, and then what's the map for getting there? And so our focus has really been on the implementation piece, on working with our clients. We have, as I mentioned, over 500 clients that we've worked with, a mix of communities, counties, economic development groups, regional groups, state groups, utilities of every sort. So we've got a pretty good handle on what's new and the topics that are happening in economic development today. So as I like to say, enough about me, let's talk about you a little bit. We talk about traditional economic development, right? Traditional economic development, there's three legs of the stool. You're familiar with this? business retention expansion, business recruitment, business startup. And you think about all the things that Joe and the others have just talked about, what's happening here in Battle Creek. And you've got a lot going on in all three of those nodes, right? Business retention, business expansion, business startup. But let me tell you something. What I'm here to tell you about is that the world is changing. Most of the other groups out there today, not Battle Creek Unlimited, but many of the other groups out there today, 80, 90% of them, still have strategic plans that are focused around those traditional three legs of the stool: business retention expansion, business recruitment, business startup. Incredibly important, but insufficient in today's changing environment. And don't you want to hear either the Jaws or the Titanic music with this? Bless you. That could have been it. I don't know. Could have been it. So Jaws or Titanic music is playing at this point. All right. So in the traditional world of economic development, where we have those traditional legs of the stool, we talk a lot about business recruitment. But I don't want to overshadow business retention and expansion. Business retention and expansion is important for two reasons. Number one, it's your best defense against somebody else's business recruitment program. And number two, when you do have a prospect, the first thing they're going to do is talk to existing business, and that's going to be your deal makers or your deal breakers in terms of how well you're handling the people that you have today. Poor Shabaka yesterday was assigned to driving me around in his beautiful clean truck. I tried to get him to go off-road, get it dirty. Was not successful, but next time. We went through the Fort Custer Industrial Park. I think we went up every street, including those that aren't even on Google Maps, just to prove to you that we were there. And I asked him questions about every business that we went by, and he gave me the anecdote. So, number one, if you're not part of the BRE program, you need to be part of it, because the information that you learn from those business retention expansion programs are the things that keep you ahead of the game. And as Joe mentioned, you've been hearing from these interviews for the last couple years, right, that talent is an issue, that talent is a shortage, that we just don't have enough people. Anybody disagree with that? You just need more good qualified people. Can we please get those in here? Before I jump to that, let's talk about what we know traditionally in economic development, that the most successful economic development groups have three things in common. Number one, they have a high degree of alignment and readiness. Number two, they focus on regionalism. And number three, they can answer the question, why is Battle Creek a great place to live, work, and play, which we call differentiation, okay? Those have been the three success factors for a long time. And what I'm here to tell you is that those are still the same success factors that we're looking at, but the scope of what they mean has changed dramatically. And so if you're an employer and you're literally saying, hey, just please bring me those qualified employees and I'll take it from there, because that's how the system used to work. Right? And what's your definition of a qualified employee? And I did not hear this in Battle Creek, but I've heard in other areas, is you're not wearing pajamas, you show up, and you can pass a drug test. And there's some humor to that, but there's some truth to that too, right? In terms of what employers are saying. And I'm here to tell you that if that's still your perception of economic development, especially if you're an employer, that's no longer the gist of it. Because the status quo is not an option. So I was in a small community, a rural community, which is where I tend to be, right? Take the big plane, take the little plane, and then drive for a long time. That's where I'm at, right? Rural America. In this very small community, talking to a group, got their board members there, and literally one of the board of directors said to the executive director, Maureen, if you would just recruit another 300-person company, everything would be back to normal. That's literally what they said to her. And so we said, what we did is we said, okay, let's break that down a little bit, right? Let's unpack that a little bit. Okay, so let's presume that you can hire 300 people, right? Where are they going to live? How are they going to get to work? How much are they going to get paid relative to all the other businesses that are here? How are you going to keep them? Right? All of these kinds of questions start to come into mind. What kind of wages are you going to get? Are these even the types of jobs that you might want? And the truth is, right, that as you think about that story, what you think about is, you know, kind of what I call the if you build it, they will come kind of psychology, right? So in my dad's day, it was literally go recruit a company, the employees will come out of the woodwork, They'll spend money downtown on a Saturday night, right? Chamber's happy, everybody's happy. Go get another one, right? It was elephant hunting. It was smokestack chasing. You can call it whatever you want to. But something happened along the way. And what happened along the way is that our clients, the companies, started to say, show me where the people are. Wherever they are, that's where I'm going. And so now instead of the company saying, I'm going to go here and the people will follow, catch what I'm saying? The companies are saying, show me where the people are, and I'll go there. And now the people are saying, show me where there's a place where there's a brew pub and a wedding hall. You could have a hell of a night there. You could get married. You could go down and start a business, and you could end up in the basement drinking all in one night, right? You've got the whole ecosystem right there in one building, right? And so that's the kind of decision-making process that's happening today. As far as the where do I want to live, the people go there, and the jobs are starting to follow. And so doesn't it make sense then that a lot of what's happening here is trying to reinvigorate downtown and getting new restaurants and bars and all these kinds of things? There's a business reason to it, right? It's not just because Joe likes a beer now and then. There's actually a business function behind it. And that seems like, well, you know, Janet, we've seen these trends come and go, right? We've seen different industries become popular, different industries less popular. Is this really a thing? And it's a thing with a capital T, people, let me tell you. We did some very in-depth research over the last couple months here that quantified it. And I've got a whole nother presentation. And for those of you who are into extra credit, I'll spend another 2 or 3 hours going through it. But what we did is we looked at this whole pipeline so what people are coming into the workforce, what people are going out, and what's happening within that workforce. Because I wanted to show some context, because all of us read the paper and we see these little articles about maybe immigration, or we start to see that the baby boomers actually do want to retire, people, right? The baby boomers actually want to retire. We're not going to hang on forever. That maybe there's labor force participation rates. How do those fit in? The millennials, right? They lost the manual to having kids, but now they've made it up, right? Did you know that most of the majority of children today, their parents are millennials or Gen Z, God forbid? It's true, right? In 2018, millennials surpassed baby boomers in the workforce. And so there's a lot of changes that are going on that are structural, way beyond what's happening in Battle Creek, right? Very consistent with what's happening in Battle Creek. But when you look at it in this context, you can say, this thing's here. This talent issue is here, and it's going to be here for a long time. You may feel that here in Battle Creek, it's different for you. It's harder for you. It's more of a problem for you than everywhere else. The good news and the bad news is pretty much every place has a talent issue of one sort or another. So you're not alone. That's the first thing I want to share. There's not something structurally wrong here that's making it more difficult for companies here. In fact, you've been able to muster out more growth. You're able to draw in jobs into the community that other places probably aren't able to do because you've got such a strong, especially manufacturing base, but also service base and also military and also service industries, right? The thing that I want to bring home to you from our work, right? So business retention expansion professional Shabaka, he saw the train coming years ago. The work that I do, I saw the train coming years and years ago. I wrote a book about talent and economic development coming on 4 years ago. I followed that up with a database of over 300 talent strategies that places are using to address the talent issues. What Battle Creek is doing in downtown Michigan is in that database because it is so innovative to use a very small sum of money as a momentum to catalyze development downtown to attract people who then want to work and live and be employed in this community, right? It's not a single talent issue. So in working with all of these different areas and all these different groups on talent, here's a couple little things that I want to share with you about talent. There is not a single talent issue with a capital T, a capital I. There is a combination of talent issues that's actually unique to each community. You may think it's the same as the next guy and the next guy and the next guy, but when you dig underneath the surface, it's different. And it's different because your economic assets are different. You might have great community college, for example, as you do here. Or you may have a four-year that's making inroads here. Or you may have some other great NGL kind of program. So you have different economic assets here, and you also have different goals. You have different aspirations of what it is that you want to be. And so therefore, the solutions to your talent issues are the same. With that 300 plus initiatives that we have, I can guarantee you that none is going to be a perfect plug and play, but there's a lot of clues and a lot of pieces there, elements that get combined to create the solutions for you. Another key thing is to get to the root causes. And so if you're an employer and you're having trouble recruiting, ask why. Ask why it is. We've been in communities where there's 3 major fatal flaws, and our research shows this. The number 3 is cost structure is just out of whack. There's something wrong. That's not an issue with Battle Creek. Number 2 is there's not available sites and buildings. You just heard about some of the new developments that are happening with spec buildings and new land, and we went out there yesterday and looked at them. That's not it. Number 1 is access to talent, availability of talent, right? And that is a root cause. But that's not a good enough understanding of what the issue is. So if you're having trouble hiring, you got to figure out why, right? I teach at Heartland every year, so 6 Midwestern states. I also teach in 4 other states in the basic economic development class, and I've always asked the students what's going on, what are they working on? And I remember a number of years ago, there was a student in western Nebraska, and he said, we are just having a heck of a time recruiting people out here. And I asked the students, why do you think that is? And everybody said what? There's nothing to do in western Nebraska, right? And he said, well, no, actually what we figured out is that these young engineers were moving in, so they had basically young families, young kids, and there was no place for them to go. But I want you to do this, take it to the next level. Why was there no place for them to live? Because there are a bunch of widows and widowers in these big old farmhouses. Huh, that would have been perfect, right, for a young family. Well, why were the widows and widowers in these big old farmhouses? Because there was no retirement housing for them and they wanted to stay in town. That is something an economic developer can solve. So it's a simple example, but it's very pertinent to say, get to the root causes of what your talent issues are. And then the conventional wisdom is only half right. What I mean by that is, usually when people realize that there's talent issues in a community, some poor body puts together a group, and they get together all the stakeholders, and it could even be a group this big, and they say, let's nail it down, let's figure out what all of our issues are. And maybe there's 3 issues, 5 issues, 7 issues, whatever the number is. That's perfect, that's the half they got right. But then what happens is typically they say, great, now what we're gonna do, this is gonna be so awesome, you guys. We're gonna create task forces for each of these issues, and we're gonna send you all off the gate at the same time, and we're gonna wish you the best and check in 6 months. And what happens in 6 months? Y'all laughing. Did this happen here? Okay, so what happens is people run out of steam. I mean, these are big challenges, and everyone's going in different directions. But what you can do is you can say, you're right, we got 6, 8, 12, whatever the number is, we got these issues. Let's pick the easiest one and work on it together and get that one done and move on. And then the next one, and then the next one. And what you do with that is you start to build some momentum. And I do the analogy of ½ an inch deep and a mile wide. It doesn't look like you make any progress. ½ inch wide and a mile deep, you're nailing it, right? And so you start lining up these programs like you already have, like NGL. I mean, that's an amazing program. Some of these other things, the STEM investments you have, some of the incredible things, just start lining them up and say, what else do we got here? What else can we start to knock off? Here's another little fact. Here's another little fact. Do we have anybody here from Michigan Works? Anybody workforce development? Any of those guys here? Brave people. Excellent. We got anyone here from higher ed? We have community college here. We got Grand State. Look at all you. Grand State. What's it called? Grand Valley. Thank you. Got anyone here from there? We got high school. Got K-12? Okay, so here's what's happening in this world, and they're worried. They're like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna raise my hand up or not, but they're all sitting near the back. They can make a run for it if they need to, right? Here's what's happened in this world of economic development. As the talent pools and the talent issues have come to the forefront, those folks there, they have been put on the hot seat for a long time. at least 5 years, probably longer, to say, you all got to step up. You all got to get your programs together. You all got to connect with the demand better. And you know what? My experience, for the most part, they've done it. They have done it. And so now when we're around the table, there's still more work to be done. There always is. But for the most part, the workforce development programs, the higher ed, they've come a long way in just the last couple of years, right? Michigan being a leader, by the way, in the country. Yes, Michigan. Michael Finney was here. He was doing some really cool stuff, and it's still perpetuating on. But here's the thing now. Now it's like, we've got to have the employers at the table too, because it's not enough to say, just bring me the employees that I need before. It's like, we've got to talk about employee engagement. We've got to talk about flexibility. We've got to talk about, I don't know if I'm going to go so far as to say dogs in the office, but those kinds of things are super important to employees today. I'll give you another Iowa story. In Iowa, you might also say there's nothing to do, but that's not true because they have baseball. And in Iowa, to go to the baseball games on a Friday night is like their culture. And if the baseball games start at 4:30, but the shifts don't end till 5 p.m. because it's an ethanol plant and it's 3 shifts, right? And you want to leave early or come late because your kid is playing and you get points, that's not going to be good, right? Because you need the workforce, you need to have the safety in the plant, you need all that kind of stuff. But you also need workers. And workers today have choices, right? We know that they'll jump, right? And so how can you accommodate the fact that baseball's a good thing and work it into the plant schedule? Here's another example. Childcare, right? Third shifts. First shift starts at 6 a.m. Childcare facilities don't open till 7. And now I'm over in Missouri. This is a Missouri example. That doesn't do you very much good, right? If you got to be on the floor at 6 and the child care doesn't open until 7. So there's some things here about how can we accommodate some of the needs of the workers and kind of bend halfway to get there. All right. So what we find is that model that I talked about has changed, right? Not only is it not just if you build it, they will come, but now think about this. The companies are saying we want talent. The talent is saying we want to be in cool communities, and the communities are like, that's awesome because we want a great quality of place. And so think about now how the mission of so many economic development groups has expanded, right? Because now these things of workforce and housing and downtown development, which used to not be in the lane of economic development, right? And now they're very critical to the success, you know? Robert and his team is trying to recruit businesses. They've got a great business case. They've got a great business case for that park. But then it comes to the talent and the housing and the what's there to do and all those kinds of things. Those become the barriers, right, to growth. So you want to have more activity here, more jobs, but now the barriers to that become those kinds of things. This is what we found, and I almost numbered them. I took the numbers off. I made them bullets because I am a consultant nonetheless. But these are the top 5 barriers to talent retention and recruitment that we've seen across the country. Number 1 is housing. Number 2, transportation. Number 3, access to childcare. Number 4, broadband. Number 5, drugs. And that's probably about the order that they play out in this community. And the thing about housing, right, we've got a lot of those examples in our database of 300 talent strategies because they're talent strategies today. They're also community development, but they're talent strategies. And the thing about housing that is just a hard thing for a lot of boards to understand is that for 30 years, communities didn't have to incentivize housing. They just happened. But developers are pulled in lots of different ways. They got lots of different options. Construction trades are hard to find. So what we're finding is after 25, 30 years, communities who haven't had to incentivize housing are starting to do it. We're seeing that all across the country. So lots of big changes happening. And that iceberg, it's not just business as usual. Status quo is not an option, right? I also want to talk just a little bit about automation, right? This is a wonderful report that McKinsey put out, and they basically took all of the industries, and then they broke it down to all the occupations within those industries, and then they looked at 7 scales from left to right of how automatable is the activities. So from managing on the left to repetitive physical activity on the right, those 7 activities across the top of the chart here, and then they aggregated it back up to say how automatable are every single industry. First of all, little fun cocktail party fact. So when you're over there getting married, starting up your business, and having a celebratory drink, you can share this little fun fact. It's not manufacturing that's the most automatable. It's actually food service and accommodations. And think about it, right? They market it as a benefit, right? You can check into a hotel on your app. You don't even have to go to the front desk. You can use a wireless key to get into your room. Pretty soon you'll be able to change your own sheets, I'm sure, because they don't have people, right? In the tourist towns of western South Dakota, they're building 4-story hotels, and they don't have enough staff for the top 2 floors. So they can't even rent out those rooms. So they're at 50% occupancy to begin with, which is below break even, right? So this idea of automation. One other fun fact, when you go through a drive-through and they say, hello, welcome to McDonald's, may I take your order? That may be a call center that's in Phoenix. Did you know that? It's not necessarily in the back of the house of the restaurant that you're in. It's kind of fun. Okay, so lots of impact here, potentially, of automation. And I appreciated, Jim, your slides on productivity, because that's the real measure. I think that's one of the real measures of an economy, is not just the jobs and investment, but also the productivity. Are the companies able to make money? Are they able to increase the output that they're having in terms of value add? So I can't help but put something in about automation. The thing is, that's true, though, is that in that site selection process, where literally we used to go through this whole process and narrow it down to 3 finalist communities that were equivalent, and then from there, quality of life mattered the most. You get down to those 3 finalists, and then it goes down to where do you feel the most comfortable, the most welcome, where do you feel like you really fit. What's changed is that now, at the beginning of the process, our clients are asking us, and therefore we're asking the Roberts of the world, tell me about what there is to do. Tell me about how many restaurants there are. Tell me about do. So those quality of life things are coming into play much earlier in the process and much more important. Okay? So let's tie this back to what it means for Battle Creek. And I've got just a couple takeaways here. The first is that, in the way that I see the world, the old 3 legs of the stool is being replaced by a new 3 legs of the stool. So good news and bad news. The good news is that you still have to do everything you did before, the 3 legs of the stool: business retention, expansion, business recruitment, business startup. That's the orange. You still have to do all that stuff. But now you also have to be thinking about talent, and you have to be thinking about placemaking, quality of place. Okay? So those of you who are on the board, those of you who are in the community that are working on this, think about scope creep. What do you do? Because your businesses are saying we need help with talent, and you are driven to get jobs and investment, you start doing downtown development. You start looking at how you can support housing. You start looking at how you can support your schools and the educational things. You start being the innovative, envelope-pushing leader that Battle Creek has been for the last several years in getting into these other areas, because it's critically important for success of the whole ecosystem. He had much better graphics than I did, but here's some of the examples of what's happening in the traditional business development area, right? You can't let this fall, so you've still got the expansions. You've got an amazing airport. Key assets that I saw yesterday, a lot of communities would have all of their bets placed on just that airport, and that's just one of your bets that you have here in Battle Creek. Lots of good stuff going on there. You're also doing some talent initiatives. There's all kinds of things going on with Grand Valley State, Kellogg Community College, the University, Western Michigan. Great stuff, terrific stuff. Just absolutely wonderful things that are happening to get and continue to invest in talent. And then we've got the quality of life things. And we were able to tour this facility yesterday. It's still so awesome. I don't know how you got up this morning. You have to be exhausted. It's just a work of art, right? And a work of love, and a really cool facility on all levels. And to have that here as kind of the first, one of the the first elements in a really cool downtown. It's just got to be, you've got to be so proud of these guys. I mean, it's just awesome. So congratulations on that. A second implication of all of this change, as we go from just a business and industrial development, right, just that, to the talent and the placemaking piece, the tent gets bigger. There's more people involved. I mean, I was just so floored with how many organizations in this community have a hand in economic and community development. I couldn't fit the logos on my slides. Joe had to put them on paper because he couldn't fit them all on one slide, right? So it's amazing, all of those things. And you don't all have to be in the same boat, but it certainly helps if you're rowing the same direction, doesn't it? Certainly helps if you're all rowing in the same direction. And so we're seeing increasingly the tent getting bigger, more need for alignment. Alignment, in my opinion, is one of the most powerful concepts in economic development today. Okay? This is a fun one as well. So Battle Creek Unlimited, I didn't put them in one of these boxes because sometimes their role is convener and cheerleader, and sometimes their role is the leader, and sometimes they're just participating. And that's appropriate, right? In fact, all of us in this room probably should wear those 3 different hats for all kinds of different initiatives. And that's what we're seeing, right? Is more of a collaborative kind of structure in terms of who's doing what and how are we working together and how are we communicating. Because I can assure you that there is plenty of work to go around. And what we want to do, right, is have it aligned so that we're having the greatest impact that we can as a community. The next implication is that talent and business development should both be included as areas to include in your economic development plans and programs. I said earlier that some 90% of economic development groups today still have their economic development strategic plan under those 3 traditional legs of the stool. And Joe did not give me permission for this. He doesn't know that I'm going to show it, but I went through and read his strategic plan. This is very prescient. There's economic development, there's workforce, there's education, there's government, there's small business, and there's quality of life. He is a different graphics person than I do, but the concept is the same, right? That we can't be successful in economic development anymore if we're not looking at the bigger picture. Because I can guarantee you're not going to be able to recruit that next big company if these other pieces aren't in place, right? And so we get into what is the impact here in terms of placemaking and place managing. And again, we've got a definition here from the Institute for Public Places, but it includes a lot of these things. And so it's the buildings, and it's the educational aspects, and it's the things to do, and it's the festivals, and it's the parades. It's all of these kinds of things that contribute to what make Battle Creek what Battle Creek is. Again, I stole this from his strategic plan. Sorry, Joe, about that. But look they've already got on the radar that they want to support and help motivate, maybe convene some of these different activities that are already in their plans, and some that they've already made progress on. So again, this is the direction that the world is going. We're going to start to see other economic development groups around the country follow the lead of what's happening here in Battle Creek. I want to talk about key success factors, because I talked before, right, about readiness, alignment, and differentiation. They all still hold, but now they're broader. They're broader, and so it's not just site readiness, which we saw, but it's talent readiness, it's entrepreneurship and workforce readiness. It's showing that all of that is ready. It's not just business retention expansion recruitment, it's also the talent recruitment. It's also the talent recruitment. And then for alignment, right, it's not just the usual suspects, but it's everybody else who has a stake in economic development. So readiness goes without saying. And maybe, perhaps most importantly, to kind of tie this up with a bow, when we start to think about the measures of success of economic development today, it is jobs and investment. It'll continue to be jobs and investment, but the forward-thinking communities are also thinking about economic mobility and economic equity. So people have a chance to succeed. People are in short supply. We want to keep the ones we have. We want to give them opportunities for growth. I often use as a definition of economic development the opportunity for your children, your grandchildren, to work and live in this community. They may not choose to, but is there an opportunity for them that they actually have a valid choice? Only the most forward-thinking organizations have those kinds of ideas in their mission statement. And again, I stole this from the Battle Creek Unlimited strategic plan, but we've got here not just increased population, but housing density, increased job creation, increased market value, increased investment in Battle Creek public-private, increased educational attainment, increased mobility, increase in median income. So things that are just beyond the traditional jobs and investment. My final thought would be, as the ultimate indicator of how our community is doing in economic development and how resilient and welcoming you're going to be to accept what this new future of economic development is how many communities can get 310 people out for breakfast on a cold, rainy 7 a.m. Tuesday meeting. So congratulations to all of you. You're doing a great job, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet. That was great. It was a pleasure.
Do we have any questions for our speakers this morning?
I think I'm addressed to both the speaker and to Joe in that I'm in real estate and commercial real estate, and we read about opportunity zones. And I'd like to know first, on a bigger scale, the impact of opportunity zones. I know it's relatively new. And for Joe would be, where are we, do we have them set up in Battle Creek, and where would they be, or how would we find them?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. We do have 2 opportunity zones in Battle Creek. We're actually currently working on a prospectus with the city of Battle Creek where we'll be pitching in Detroit in April. But what I'm seeing, and maybe Janet can talk about this a little bit more, we're a handful of years into it, and it was a well-intended program, and I think it's going to continue, and it'll probably need some tweaks. But what's really happened nationally is that you've found that the opportunity zone investments are replacing traditional financing in the larger markets. So people that are piling their capital gains into opportunity zones are doing it in such a way, and they're doing it in markets where they're guaranteed to get their returns. So that's probably a tweak that needs to happen before the Battle Creeks of the world start to see that, or we just need folks that have the ability to invest capital gains. It's going to be more of a heartstring investment in Battle Creek at this time until some of those rules change.
I would agree with that. So we thought that when the opportunity zones came out that it might be a panacea because it's specifically focused on some of the rural and more distressed areas and so forth. But we haven't necessarily seen that. It's just become another tool in the toolbox. Good to have, but not driving it. I think the other challenge with that program is that the timeline is very limited. And so there's a great deal of activity right now trying to get those investments because the timeline they have to recoup that is fairly limited. So it's not a continuing program. So there's what's happening in terms of best practices is getting out there and marketing them because it doesn't sell itself like some of the other incentive programs have, and it creates another onus actually on the economic development group to go and find now a different level of investors that they've been looking than they've ever looked for before. So that's what the best practices are.
And additionally, we do have 2 opportunity zones, and one of them encompasses a majority of downtown Battle Creek, as an FYI.
Yep.
Other questions for our panel? In the middle, Adam.
So there's a lot of focus in the downtown development, which as a millennial myself is awesome. But we've seen in Detroit that the downtown focus hasn't really trickled out to the neighborhoods. Is there a plan for how the downtown is going to expand into some of our other neighborhoods?
Yeah, so when we talked a little bit earlier in my presentation, you know, some of the emphasis was a starting place. We're starting downtown. And I talked about a lot of the partners around the table. We are talking, we're around the table about once we get some momentum downtown, kind of taking some of those other spokes and working themselves out. So there are plans in the works. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Next question. Gentleman in the turtleneck, I think.
Hi, my name's Tony Francis, and so my question, I'm not exactly sure, maybe you, Joe, it would be that we have a great infrastructure downtown now. It's been really revitalized. When does the marketing campaign start? Because in the marketing campaign, I feel like we can really address some of these small successes that the general population doesn't hear, and the
Right.
marketing will be a huge success in that.
Right, that's a great question as well. We've done a little bit of marketing, probably not as aggressively as we need to. When I talked about us developing a prospectus for Battle Creek, we're actively putting some marketing pieces together to use for the prospectus, but we will be utilizing it on a broader scale. But I go back to the partners around the table. We know this is a need. We know we need to champion the wins, and we know we need to market more aggressively. So those conversations are taking place. So well-pointed question.
I think we've got time for one or two more. In the back, yep.
I'm not exactly sure where this fits in, but I have a concern about the transportation. As you bring more people into the city, it seems to be that we have limited transportations. Our buses, they stop at a very short time, and I'm wondering how we get people out to the malls and back from the malls and the shopping areas or the outlining areas. And along with that, I see problems with parking, so more plans for that.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes.
So what you've described is correct, right? That transportation is a barrier for quality of life, and then also for people to even get out to the jobs in the industrial park. And what we've seen in a lot of places is that that's like a regional planning commission kind of thing, those kinds of entities that are looking at getting people from one place to another. I don't know if you do that as part of your organization, but typically I haven't seen that as part of economic development because the footprint is usually not exactly the same. But transportation to me would be aligned with when we were in the industrial park yesterday afternoon, we saw people waiting for the bus, those kinds of things. But are those buses lined up with when the shifts end, and all of those kinds of opportunities I think would be another potential advantage for the community.
Right, and I can say, yes, those are definitely concerns. Those are definitely concerns that we have, but we are at the table having the discussions. I know there's some parking discussions going on currently at the city, and there's a constant evolution of the transportation. But again, that is our concern as of attracting as well, that we need to solve some of those issues.
Last question. We've got time for one more. No? If not, well then join me in thanking our speakers for their insights today. Also, again, I'll remind you, please fill out your program survey. You can leave it there at the table. We'll pick it up when you're done. And again, thank you all for attending this year.
Thank you.
Next year.
The greatest moments of your life. What were they like? Did you step out of your comfort zone and into the spotlight? It takes courage to find your path, to keep working and trying things out for the moment that everything falls into place. Find the people who believe in you, who challenge you, inspire you. It takes courage, but together we create our greatest moments and find out our true potential here in Battle Creek.
I was born and raised in Battle Creek. When I was 20, I moved away from Battle Creek and came back about 5 years later. Since then, we have just completely fallen in love with Battle Creek.
Now we have 5 teenagers. They've all had educational opportunities that are world-class.
We love our school system, and safety is the #1 priority for them. I mean, you're not going to find a more generous community anywhere else.
They're just unlimited opportunities. And we love
our city.
It's a great place to live.
There's a smile that says you want the best for those around you. And when you dig into the work of helping others, you realize we all need someone we can depend on. There are so many ways to make a difference, and there is nothing more rewarding, beautiful, and human as giving here in Battle Creek.
Be there snow or rain, slush or sleet, there's always fun right here in Battle Creek. battlecreekvisitors.org.
The higher education opportunities here in Battle Creek are tremendous. One of the things that any individual at any stage of their life can expect is something that is customized to their skill set, their interests, whatever it is that they're looking for. Battle Creek has it in terms of higher education.
If you're an individual that doesn't want to pursue a 4-year degree in college and you're interested in working with your hands and building a future in the construction industry, Battle Creek's the place for you. There's a lot of opportunities in the skilled trades right now. Great wages, great benefits, health care, pension.
I have no doubt that someone wanting to improve their life could do it here in Battle Creek.
AccessVision. Your voice, your community.